You wake up and see a streak of blood on the fabric beneath your body. But this is not a modern morning. This is 4,000 years ago. There are no sanitary pads, tampons, painkillers, or private bathrooms. Within the next few minutes, you still have to fetch water, prepare food, care for children, and begin a long day of labor. You need to find a material soft enough to place against your body. You need to keep it in the right position while walking, bending down, and carrying heavy loads. At the end of the day, you still have to wash it with almost no privacy. Women solved these problems for thousands of generations. But most of the items they used have decayed and disappeared from archaeology. Even stranger, many well-known answers today may never have existed. Egyptian papyrus tampons, Greek wool wrapped around wooden sticks, and Roman sponges are often told as facts. But when we turn to the actual texts and artifacts, the evidence begins to disappear. So what did ancient women use? How did they keep the material against their bodies? And why has history preserved what men imagined about menstrual blood while almost completely losing women's practical knowledge? Before searching for ancient sanitary pads, we need to correct a very modern assumption. Ancient women had the same basic reproductive system as women today, but their reproductive lives often followed a very different rhythm. A modern woman may experience regular cycles for many decades. For many ancient women, pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding may have occupied most of their reproductive years. Pregnancy pauses the menstrual cycle. After childbirth, frequent breastfeeding can delay the return of ovulation. The period without menstruation sometimes lasted for many months or longer. Unstable food supplies, heavy labor, and the amount of energy the body received could also affect the cycle. Therefore, many ancient women may have experienced fewer menstrual periods than women in industrial societies today. The body may pause the cycle during pregnancy, but unfortunately, village work had no similar pause function. However, this does not mean ancient women almost never menstruated. Not everyone was continuously pregnant, gave birth to many children, or breastfed for the same length of time. A young girl, a woman who had no children, and a mother with many children would have had completely different experiences. Nutrition, health, age, and social status made the picture even more complicated. When menstruation occurred, blood, moisture, pain, and the risk of staining clothing still had to be dealt with. And although the number of cycles may have been lower, each one still required a practical solution. That solution was made from materials that had almost no chance of surviving for thousands of years. When archaeologists find a sword, the metal can reveal its age, origin, and traces of use. When they find a jar, they can analyze the remains of food or drink still clinging to the inside. But the materials best suited for managing menstruation belong to the group most likely to disappear. Linen, wool, cotton, plant fibers, moss, and sponges can all decompose completely under ordinary conditions. They only have a chance of surviving in special environments such as dry deserts, freezing conditions, or oxygen-poor soil. Even when a piece of fabric remains intact, its former purpose is still very difficult to determine. It may once have been a cleaning cloth, wound dressing, clothing liner, hygiene rag, or menstrual material. A piece of fabric does not leave a note explaining which days of the month it used to work. It may also have been washed, repaired, and reused for many different purposes. Once it became too old, it could be cut into pieces, burned, or discarded. Unlike jewelry and weapons, a blood-soaked piece of cloth was rarely buried with the dead as a valuable object. It was also not something kings usually wanted carved onto temple walls. Ancient texts may devote hundreds of lines to taxes, warfare, and rituals, but they rarely describe a woman folding cloth, tying it around her hips, and washing it again at the end of the day. Most of the people who understood that process were women. Most of the people who wrote official records were men. As a result, the surviving record often tells us more about what men thought about menstrual blood than what women actually did with it. The silence of archaeology does not prove that women used no materials at all. But the fact that a society had fabric does not prove that it possessed a specific sanitary pad design. To find an answer, we must combine materials, clothing, medicine, and living conditions into reasonable possibilities. The most reasonable answer may not be a strange invention. It may simply have been a soft piece of cloth folded into several layers, Fabric can absorb liquid, is easy to shape, can be washed, and appeared in many agricultural societies. However, the type of fabric a woman could access depended greatly on where she lived. In Egypt, linen was widely used for clothing, bandages, and household items. A soft strip of linen could have been folded, placed against the body, and washed many times. That is a very reasonable possibility. But no artifact has been conclusively identified as an Egyptian woman's menstrual pad. The more famous story claims that they used softened papyrus as tampons. Egyptian medical texts do indeed describe many materials being inserted into the vagina, but they usually relate to suppositories, gynecological treatment, diagnosis, or contraception. An object inserted into the body in a medical text does not automatically become an experimental version of a modern tampon. The papyrus tampon may therefore be more of a compelling story than a proven fact. Wool is another reasonable option in sheep-raising societies around the Mediterranean. Soft wool could absorb liquid, be rolled up, or placed between layers of fabric. Greek physicians also used wool and lint in many treatments. From this came the story that Greek women wrapped wool around a wooden stick, but the direct evidence for that design is very weak. Even if wool was used, it did not necessarily have to be inserted into the body. A soft piece of wool placed inside a loincloth seems far more practical than a distinctly unfriendly wooden stick. Cotton may also have been used, but it was not equally common in every region and period. In parts of South Asia, Africa, and the Americas, cotton was cultivated and woven from a very early time. Elsewhere, it only became common after trade networks expanded. Societies also used many kinds of local plant fibers to make rope, coarse fabric, and mats. In Mesoamerica, maguey provided fiber, food, drink, and many essential items. Its fibers could be processed into softer material, but the ability to make it does not prove that Aztec women definitely used it as a menstrual pad. Natural sponges also frequently appear in stories about Roman women. People around the Mediterranean did use sponges for bathing, hygiene, and medical treatment. They are soft and can hold liquid. However, evidence that Roman women regularly used them as tampons remains very limited. Moss and leaves are also often added to lists of ancient materials. Some types of moss are absorbent, but leaves are often slippery, rough, or irritating. Living close to nature does not mean ancient people placed anything green against the most sensitive part of the body. After removing the uncertain stories, fabric remains the strongest candidate. It is not spectacular, mysterious, or impressive enough to be carved onto a temple. But a good material does not need to impress future generations. It only needs to absorb liquid, be washable, and not give up when the user starts walking faster. If you enjoy everyday historical mysteries like this, subscribe to the Root World channel so you do not miss the next fascinating discoveries. Because the next section addresses the most practical question of all: how did ancient women keep those materials in the right position while they still had to walk, work, and care for their families? A piece of cloth could absorb blood, but still be useless if it slipped down when the woman walked. Most ancient women did not have close-fitting elastic underwear like people do today. Clothing ranged from loincloths and wrapped garments to long dresses with multiple underlayers. In some societies, cloth may have been placed inside an existing loincloth. Elsewhere, it may have been held in place with cords or strips of fabric tied around the hips. A long strip could also be passed between the legs and secured at the front and back. This principle was similar to the sanitary belts used before modern underwear became common. But we cannot turn one reasonable method into a universal design for the entire ancient world. An Egyptian woman wearing linen would not have handled the material in the same way as a woman living in a cold, mountainous region. Climate affected thickness, drying time, and comfort. In hot regions, too many layers of cloth could trap heat and cause chafing. In cold regions, damp material could take much longer to dry. During the rainy season, washing was sometimes easier than finding a way to dry it. The weather clearly did not care that this task was already complicated enough. A distant water source also made every change of material take more time. Wealthy women may have owned many strips of cloth and spare clothing. Poor women may have had to use the same few pieces of cloth for several days. The amount of blood also varied from person to person and from day to day. On lighter days, some people may have relied only on their underlayers. On heavier days, they needed additional material and had to adjust it frequently. A method that worked only when the user sat still was unsuitable for someone who had to fetch water, grind grain, and care for children. The important skill was not only choosing the right material. Women also had to know how thickly to fold it, where to place it, how tightly to secure it, and when to change it. That knowledge was probably passed directly from woman to woman rather than written in books. Imagine a woman leaving home in the morning with 2 neatly folded pieces of cloth. By midday, one piece had already been used. The other had to be kept clean and dry while she continued working. After several hours, the used material needed to be removed and washed. But water was not always only a few steps away. She might have had to walk to a well, reservoir, or riverbank with other women. Washing the material therefore took place in the middle of daily work rather than in a private bathroom. Drying space created another problem. The cloth needed to dry completely before being used again. But hanging it in a shared living area could compromise privacy. Some people may have hidden the material beneath other clothing or dried it in a discreet area. Those with too little cloth sometimes had to reuse it before it was fully dry. Damp material or prolonged friction could cause discomfort and irritation. This does not mean ancient people were completely unhygienic. Many societies had bathing and washing practices and used various cleaning substances. The important issue was who had access to water, time, space, and enough replacement cloth. Wealthy women may have had someone to help prepare water and wash clothing. Poor women had to balance hygiene with the work of keeping their families alive. Menstruation did not stop the fields from needing care. Young children also did not often respect the schedule of the reproductive cycle. Some records from Deir el-Medina suggest that household work may have changed when women were menstruating, but the texts do not explain whether a man took time off work to provide care, perform her tasks, or follow a ritual rule. History sometimes preserves a day off while completely losing the story of what happened during that day. Blood could be washed out of cloth, but pain could not be wrung dry and hung on a clothesline. Menstrual cramps did not appear alongside offices, meeting schedules, and morning coffee. The uterus of an ancient woman also contracted to expel blood and tissue. Those contractions could cause abdominal pain, back pain, nausea, and fatigue. Ancient medical texts describe painful menstruation, irregular cycles, and blood that did not appear at the expected time. Healers often believed that retained menstrual blood could cause illness. They used heat, massage, drinks, and many kinds of plants to stimulate menstrual flow. A warm cloth bag, hot water container, or heated stone could help relieve pain. This solution did not require the user to understand hormones or prostaglandins. Herbal remedies were far more complicated. Pennyroyal, rue, tansy, and several Artemisia species were once used to affect the uterus. Some plants truly contain active compounds capable of causing physiological reactions, but real effects do not mean safety. The same substance could stimulate the uterus at a low dose and cause poisoning at a high dose. The boundary between medicine, a menstrual stimulant, and an abortifacient was sometimes very unclear. Healers also could not accurately measure the active compounds in each leaf. A formula that helped one person could endanger another. Knowledge of medicinal plants was passed down through midwives, healers, and older women. Part of it was based on genuine observation across many generations. Another part was based on incorrect theories or connections that had never been tested. In the history of medicine, completely natural has never meant completely safe. Women directly experienced menstruation, but most of the famous surviving theories were written by men. Greek physicians viewed the cycle as an important sign of health and fertility. They observed its timing, the amount of blood, and cases in which menstruation suddenly disappeared. But those observations were placed within a medical system containing many false assumptions. Aristotle believed that men provided the formative principle, while women provided the reproductive matter. In that model, the male body became the standard. The female body was viewed as a less complete version. The claim that Aristotle considered menstrual blood failed semen is an oversimplification. But the prejudice behind that theory remains very clear. Aristotle could construct an entire complex biological system. The person who actually helped a girl through her first period was still most likely her mother or sister. The Romans later had Pliny the Elder, who tried to record almost everything he had ever heard about nature. According to Pliny, menstrual blood could damage crops, turn wine into vinegar, and tarnish metal. It was also believed to affect seeds, bees, and many kinds of animals. If that entire list were true, a menstruating woman would not need a sanitary pad. She would need a natural disaster control permit. But Pliny's words reveal more about the fears of Roman scholars than the real lives of women. Roman women still had to go to the market, care for children, manage households, and continue working. The greatest danger came when false beliefs no longer remained on the page. When society turned them into rituals and rules, they could determine whom women were allowed to touch and where they were allowed to go. In ancient Jewish law, a menstruating woman could enter a ritual state called nida. This state was not entirely synonymous with being dirty, sinful, or diseased. Many other bodily states were also classified under similar purity rules. However, the regulations still affected contact and daily activities for a period of time. Some Hindu texts also imposed restrictions on sexual relations, rituals, or work. But practices varied greatly across regions, periods, and communities. All ancient Indian women cannot be grouped into a single experience. In some Zoroastrian texts, menstrual blood was regarded as an especially powerful source of ritual pollution. Women could be separated from sacred fire, water, or earth. But a rule in a text does not prove that every community followed it in the same way. In other societies, women withdrew into houses or separate spaces during menstruation. In some places, this involved isolation and control. In others, it created an opportunity to rest or spend time with other women. Some communities even associated menstruation with spiritual power. Therefore, not every menstrual lodge can be called a prison, but neither can all of them be transformed into a pleasant monthly vacation. The meaning of separation depended on whether the woman had a choice. Two women could use nearly identical pieces of cloth while living under completely different social conditions. One continued her work almost as usual. The other had to leave her home, avoid rituals, or limit contact. The material solved the biological problem. Society decided what that biological problem meant. The most difficult part was not always the flow of blood. Sometimes, it was the way the people around her interpreted and controlled it. For most of history, the most common solution was probably pieces of cloth that were folded, tied, washed, and reused. Disposable products only entered the mass market in the early 20th century. Cellulose technology created more absorbent materials, but it could not erase shame on its own. Stores had to find ways to sell products without requiring customers to say their names too loudly. The technology was ready, but society still needed more time to learn how to sell it without whispering. Before Kotex and every modern brand, thousands of generations of women developed solutions suited to their own lives. They knew which fabrics were softer, which folds were more secure, and which washing methods helped them last longer. That knowledge was rarely written in books. It was passed down through speech, observation, and private instructions between women. A piece of cloth would eventually decay and disappear from the archaeological record. A sword, statue, or book written by a male scholar had a much greater chance of surviving. As a result, we know the name of the man who once claimed that menstrual blood could ruin a field. But we do not know the name of the woman who showed her daughter how to continue working in that same field. That is not evidence that ancient women had no solutions, but evidence that history once made very different choices about what deserved to be preserved.